Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villeries Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villeries provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villeries Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters, as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Happy Thanksgiving to all. Hope you've enjoyed your Thanksgiving Day. And, of course, tonight we'll talk a lot about what's going on with the New Orleans Saints. The LSU Tigers, the Tulane Green Wave, and the New Orleans Pelicans. Saints get ready to kick it off in just a little while, taking on the Atlanta Falcons. We have a great panel, as always, to break it down for you tonight. This is about as close as Brett Martel and I have ever been on this show before. Brett's always on the outside. Brett Martel of the Associated Press joins us back on the show, along with Jay Hardgrave of ESPN 100.3 here in New Orleans. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Always good to have you back. Brett, good to see you again.
Nice
Thanks for joining us again.
Sure.
Would you tell us about that incredible publication, the Associated Press?
Yeah, it's the largest and oldest news gathering organization in the world, based in New York City, and I've been based in New Orleans with them for 20 years, first 6 years in news, and the last 14 about in sports, and It's been quite a ride, starting in 2006.
Yeah, well, you came at the right time. You know, Peyton comes to town, Saints turn it around on the heels of an LSU championship in the Dome, and yeah, you came around right time for sure.
For sports, yeah.
Yeah, for sports.
News. But it was good to be in news though, because Katrina was horrible to live through and to cover, but it was a monumental experience, and it helped me put the recovery in a better context, especially as it pertained to the Saints and all their success right afterwards, and how uplifting it was. And so I was kind of glad I was able to view it through that lens, at least.
Changed everybody's lives, obviously. I mean, for me, going from a straight sports show to a kind of a recovery show, and then the politics and sports. So it definitely widened my horizons after Katrina as well. Jay, welcome back to the show. ESPN 100.3 FM. Tell us a little bit about what you guys got going on. Of course, the station of the Pelicans now.
Station of the Pelicans, also station of the Nichols Colonels, who are starting the playoffs this week. So we're busy. Do a little hosting of the walkthrough show for the Pelicans. It's a 30-minute pregame that leads into the Pelicans broadcast, and also doing some Nichols tailgating shows. Now that Nichols is into the playoffs, we're going to be doing some work out there as long as they're into the playoffs. Hopefully it's a long run, and hopefully Coach Rebo can win a national championship for him.
And, of course, part of Gus Catgill's ESPN
Sports
show.
Hangover is still helping out there wherever I can.
Yeah, there you go. Well, welcome back to the show. Gentlemen, let's start with the Saints 9-2, 34-31 winners over Carolina. Before we get into the game, loss of Teron Armstead this week, which is really a big loss for this team, which has been compounded by the loss of Andres Pete. Pete has a broken arm, had surgery after the Atlanta Falcon game. They're saying 6 weeks for him. And I'd asked about on the show if there was some way that he could come back with a cast and be able to play. Obviously, we don't know the extent of the surgery, even though Nick Easton has played fairly well at the guard position. Ananome comes in at the tackle position for Teron Armstead. But the real big question here, as great as Teron Armstead has been for this team, he's never been able to have a full season without leaving for injury. And in the past, you've had a Clemente. In the past, you've had an Andres Pete that could swing out. Ramczyk has been able to swing from one side to the other at times. They're in a situation now where they've got a kind of an unknown in terms of the backup tackle. You look at 2 weeks ago, the Atlanta Falcons dominated the New Orleans Saints on both sides of the ball. And so now you're going into a situation where trying to avenge that loss to Atlanta in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, and then the following week having to take on that vaunted San Francisco 49er defense. Not looking good for the left side of the offensive line for the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, they've, I mean, that Niner defense has a bunch of first-round draft picks on the defensive line. So, you know, the thing is, the Saints have always done a pretty good job of designing their schemes around the strength of whoever's available, not who they wish they had available. Mm-hmm. And if they can win on Thursday, you know, and it really, some of it, I guess, depends on how Atlanta plays, because that team, after looking like they had finally figured it out against New Orleans and Carolina, right, pounding both of those teams on the road, laid a total egg at home against Tampa Bay. I mean, the NFL is just unbelievable. Like, you can't predict anything. But if the Saints, you know, are able to win tonight, they have clinched the NFC South with a whole month left in the season, which might bode well for, you know, being able to preserve Armstead and get him as healthy as possible for when it's do or die in playoff time.
Yeah, you know, it'll be interesting. Again, high ankle sprain for Armstead, and if you watch the replay, it's you kind of see where he turned that ankle a bit, but again, not a contact injury here, no. And you're wondering again how long it's going to keep him out. Look, if you have to, because of, you know, as Cam Jordan put it on Sunday, 100 hours to recover for the Atlanta Falcon game, I can understand maybe not playing him tonight, but you really would like to try to get him back next week if possible against San Francisco. Your thoughts on Armstead? And I want to kind of get into, again, long-term what's going to happen here.
It's going to be interesting to see how Sean Payton plays this, because, you know, it's a short week this week. You're only getting 4 days to the next game, but it's a long week after you get out of this game tonight. You got 10 days. So if anybody is nursing injuries, this would be the game that you would want to sit them. Looking at the way the Falcons played us last time with Grady Jarrett and Vic Beasley just creating havoc in the backfield, now with backup linemen in, that's going to be a major problem for the Saints. I think Sean Payton's got to commit to the running game. We've seen what Latavius Murray can do. You've got to be able to protect Drew Brees in that pocket, and if they were able to get pressure with Armstead in the game, now what's it going to be like when he's not there?
Yes.
So I want to see Latavius Murray, and I want to see a lot of Latavius Murray. Get the ground game going, back Atlanta's defensive line off, and then let Drew, almost like they did with Teddy, then the play action starts working more.
Yes.
I need to see a commitment from the running game tonight.
Yeah, I would agree. Which compounds that we don't know if Zach Lyon's going to play. Losing Zach Lyon has also hurt.
Yeah, that could hurt, but I mean, he's a good, solid blocker. But they have ways, I think, of filling in for him, and you know, whether they go with heavier tight end sets or and so forth. But yeah, as far as blocking, I mean, at least the guys that are the linemen that are coming in are veterans who have started in the league and they know what they're doing. Easton is you know, a decent interior lineman. I think it was kind of a numbers game with him, and also he was coming back from a significant injury when he signed with the Saints, and maybe, you know, the benefit of resting a lot of games in the first half of the season might help him get back to where he was when he was a starter in Minnesota or closer to that level.
He's playing pretty well right now.
I mean, this is his opportunity, and he's healthier than he might have otherwise been because he had some of that time off in the first half of the season. Omame, we'll see, you know, how he handles it. But, you know, the thing is, the last time they played Atlanta, I felt the bigger problem with the offensive line was the interior. And the stunting that they were doing, where they would bring the ends inside, and then, you know, I was in the locker room this week talking to Eric McCoy, the rookie center, who's generally done a good job, and he was saying that they know they did a really bad job passing off blocks, because, you know, you have to your assignment changes during a stunt, and they realize what they did wrong, and they've been working hard on that, and so. We'll see how they do. Yeah.
Let's look back at Carolina for a moment and what happened there. 34-31 winners. You look at the Saints right now. 12 penalties that were accepted, 123 yards. They had 5 of those penalties, which extended drives for the Panthers. Looked like they were going to wrap this thing up in the first half until the Cam Jordan penalty, which extended that drive and allowed the Panthers to go down and score before the half. Talk a little bit about that game and how the Saints performed. Again, look, they're resilient. They won the game. I'm excited about that. All you care about is the W at the end. The only issue I really have at this point is, again, these self-inflicted wounds. You cannot have that continue to linger, and it's been 2 weeks in a row now where they've had over 100 yards in penalties.
Yeah, it's becoming a problem, and it's becoming worse. The Cam Jordan, that was inexcusable. I know what he's trying to do. He's trying to create a turnover. Sure. He's trying to change the game right there and end it for all intents and purposes if he gets the turnover right there. But you got to be smart about it. You can't take shots like that and then extend drives where you would have been off the field. Now you're giving them a fresh set of downs and ended up cashing in on that. So those mistakes have to change. Look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, Eric, but I've kind of denied it. I'm the biggest proponent of Roger Goodell and the officiating. I think it's been absolutely atrocious.
Yes.
And the fact that the NFL does not have full-time officials, that's inexcusable.
I agree.
But when I saw the field goal, and they picked the flag up to their credit, but when I saw that kick, Joey Sly missed the kick. He put his head down, he sulked, he turned and took 3 steps, and if you watch the replay, that's when the flag came out. And I said, that's unsportsmanlike conduct or taunting, and they called holding. So how does a flag come out of an official's pocket that late and be a holding penalty on something that should have been called when you saw it? So the Saints have to understand that. Again, you go back to the pass interference that was overturned.
Yes.
It kind of went against all the norms of what the NFL's been doing all year long. So the Saints have to understand, hey, we haven't been getting a lot of breaks, so we really need to be on top of our game. We need to be sharp. We can't be making mistakes because we saw when Teddy Bridgewater was in, when you consistently have 2nd and 20 and 3rd and 20, you're coming off of the field and you're going to be punting the ball or turning it over and worse.
I'd like you to comment on that as well. We'll get a little bit deeper into it. The call against Gardner Johnson, which was Rivera went in and asked for them to take a look at. You had the 2 offensive pass interference calls, one against Cook, one against Thomas. Both those calls look like something that is just generally done in the NFL on a week-in, week-out basis in terms of just physical play between defensive back and receiver. What were your thoughts about those calls, those controversial calls on Sunday?
Well, it may have just been that the official had a bad angle, but I understand on the Cook call why it didn't get overturned, which was that his hand touched the abdomen area of the defender. The thing is that because his arm wasn't extended and there wasn't really a noticeable push, that normally would not have been called. And Cook even insisted after the game that he said he was trying to, he was doing what he's trained to do, like is this natural technique to move your hands in a way that creates a little bit of a buffer.
Yes.
You're kind of protecting your space as opposed to shoving a guy away. So that was probably a bad call, but you go and look at it in replay. It's in the middle of the game, and they say, well, there was contact, so I'm not going to overturn in replay what the official thought he saw. Now, the second call against Gardner Johnson, in many ways, that's exactly what the rule was designed to do,
yes.
Which is, a critical call at the end of the game. Did we miss something that was pretty obvious? And you can make the argument that they looked at it and said, and in fact, that's the argument that the NFL made to the pool reporter, which was Larry Holder, after the game, is that it was a big play in the last couple of minutes, and it was apparent to them that he had held the receiver going across the middle, and that's what that rule was for, is to make sure that they don't miss an obvious call at the end of the game. So I understood it. I didn't have a problem with it. Of course, it's easier to swallow, I think, for Saints fans because
they won. Right.
But if they had lost again, I'm sure they would have felt really aggrieved. But I kind of understand why that would have been one of the rare ones to be overturned because of the context.
I went back and looked, and Fox 8 actually had it on one of their shows this week where they show simultaneously the quarterback throwing the football as Gardner Johnson is reaching out and grabbing right. the way I understood the rule was once the ball is in the air, you cannot touch that receiver that's in that crossing route. It looked like it was pretty much simultaneous, so I'm not going to really get on them there. I thought the 2 offensive pass interference calls against Cook and Thomas were ridiculous, baby, because I think that's just hand fighting with defensive backs. What did you see?
You know, I'm okay with the NFL saying that that's pass interference and we don't want to miss this at the end of the game. What I'm not okay with is we have 2 sets of rules. We have one for the fourth quarter, but we have a different one for first through third quarter.
Okay.
So you just set the standard to me in the NFL. If that's pass interference, then for every game the rest of the season, I would like to see that called as pass interference. And that's the consistency that's not coming from the NFL.
Right.
And that's what has to change. Now you've got all of the cornerbacks, all of the safeties in the NFL sitting there saying, okay, well, now what are the rules? So now we can do this in the fourth, or we can't do this in the fourth. We can do this in the first, but we can't do this in the fourth. It's kind of like the strike zone in baseball. They're interpreting what the strike zone is, and you've got hitters at the plate that have no idea what the strike zone is when they get in there. It's just that umpire's interpretation of it. That's where the NFL's got to get some consistency. The players need to know what the rules are that they're playing by.
Right, or if the strike zone changed after the 7th inning is what it would be like, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like you get up to bat against the same umpire, same pitcher, and all of a sudden the strike zone's different.
Right.
So, yeah.
Would you agree with that? I mean, is it becoming that at this point?
Well, yeah, it does seem to be, like they have good intentions because they really didn't want to do this rule at all.
Yes.
This review process at all, but they thought, well, we don't want at a critical juncture to have a blown call, influence the outcome. And so that's kind of how they're calling it. But it does present a whole other set of issues in terms of consistency of, just actually following the rules.
Right.
So it's probably normal that in the first year of doing this, they would subject themselves to a lot of trial and error,
right?
And hopefully in the long term they'll get it right. But maybe it'll be good for the game to have so many problems this season, and they'll weather it and make some corrections, and in the long run the sport will be better off.
That's where I want to go next, because on the broadcast they said only 9% of those calls have been overturned. Now this wasn't an overturn. This was literally, again, a no call that was being challenged by Rivera. Some people believe, I'm one of those, that we won't see this rule next year. This rule is going to go away. Jay, your thoughts?
I agree with you. I think there's way too many problems. I think it's slowing the game down. I think the coaches are frustrated because look at Sean Payton Sunday. He was out of challenges, midway through the first quarter? Yep. He couldn't challenge anything for the rest of the game. He had to rely for the 2-minute warning in both halves. That was the only challenges he was going to get reviewed or scoring plays. So something's got to change. I don't understand why the NFL, and I get it, it's their arrogance, but when somebody has done something and perfected it, why do you want to try to reinvent the wheel? And the USFL already perfected the replay when they were in existence, and it was perfect. A coach was not penalized for getting a challenge correct. As they said, if we miss 17 calls, you should be able to challenge every one of them. So why do you only get 2 and have to get both of them right? Every time you're right, you should get that challenge back and be allowed to continue challenge. It's not the coach's fault. It's not the player's fault if the referee misses the call.
Right. Brett, what's your take? Is this going to continue, you think? Or they'll move on from this rule after a year?
I don't think it'll go away because there'll still be an effort to figure out how you can employ technology to get it right. And the reason, one reason they have to get it right is because pro sports seems to be increasingly embracing gambling and the accountability on that front. When people have money riding on it and you're going to sanction that, you can't have people feeling like, well, I can't bet on this games. I mean, they have no integrity as far as the officiating goes, and you know what I mean. You can't make a reasonable, because a lot of bettors, some people just do it for fun and throw money out there, and they don't really know what they're doing. But other people take it very seriously, and it's like the stock market. So they're analyzing the roster and they're analyzing matchups, and they're like, I can do all this work and it's not going to matter because, the officials I mean, I guess you're going to have to analyze the officiating crew too.
Well, you do. Well, that goes back to Jay's point about full-time officials.
Yeah.
It makes no sense when you talk about the NFL, especially after what happened last year in New Orleans, for that not to be one of the concessions from the NFL going forward, because they were in a contract year with the officials. They could have done that this year, where they could have said, okay, look, we're going to tear this up. We're going to start going with full-time officials. Also an age limit on officials as well. Okay, I mean, guys are bigger, stronger, faster. The NFL's much quicker game, much faster game than it was even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Again, making sure that you have the best of the best doing it, but doing it on a full-time basis, not taking the guy that owns the hardware shop 5 days a week and on the weekends he's an NFL official.
Yeah, I think that was the practical way to do it back in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, back. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, again, NFL players used to work during the off season at one time too.
But things have evolved, and there's so much money involved now in the sport that it would not be the slightest bit unreasonable to have full-time officials.
Right.
And obviously they wouldn't be working as many games as other full-time officials such as basketball and so forth. But that's not really the point. The point is, how many days are they working to get it right, and what are they getting paid per year relative to the NBA?
Well, and there's always continuing education.
Yeah,
making physical fitness. There's a lot of things you can do to be able to make sure that, again, those officials are the best of the best at what they do.
I researched it after the Saints-Rams game. The average salary for an NFL official is $180,000. Okay, most of the long-term refs are making over $200,000.
Wow.
I don't know about you, but if I'm making $200,000 at one job, I don't need a second job. But these guys are lawyers and accountants and everything else, and they leave for 2 days to go be an NFL ref for 1 day a week. There's no training. The qualification is 10 years of experience in another form of either college or high school or things like that. So there's a major problem there. You look at the Saints, they have to go tell the NFL, we need officials out for this practice. Why aren't these people full-time officials, and why aren't they out at the practices for these teams during training camp improving their game? There's ways the NFL and Roger Goodell could make this better, but as I've said so many times before, what has Roger Goodell done as the commissioner of the NFL?
Right.
And he's not doing anything. He's not making this game any better, and he needs to take control of this, and he needs to make the officiating better, because it's funny, Brett mentioned that about the gambling.
It's
on the talk shows, national talk shows, that point was brought up this morning, about how does this look with people betting on games, and now you're having all of these controversies with your officials.
Right.
So, yeah, and the other thing that I would say about that is just that the reason it hasn't changed, I mean, you ask why isn't this happening? Well, there are vested interests in that not happening, and so you have to have kind of a compelling reason for a prolonged period of time. I think just it's human nature to move people to do something dramatically different. But, it seems like public sentiment is shifting in that direction in a hurry, so I would expect at some point soon.
How much more dramatic can you get with the NFC Championship game and the fallout from that? That's about as dramatic as you get in the sport, where you're really questioning the sport in terms of fairness and validity.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, and I guess if I did research, I could come up with it, but I'm trying to remember if, at a championship, league championship series in baseball or an NBA conference finals ever had anything that controversial officiating wise.
I can't think of one.
I can't think of one either. I guess when Ohio State beat Miami in the national championship in football, when there was that interference call and was it Maurice Claret?
Yeah,
was
it was. Yes, it was. That's exactly what it was.
That was it.
So maybe that's an example in college football, but again, it's technically an amateur sport.
Right, sure. Technically. Saints got lucky on Sunday. Let's not downplay it. Missed of 2 extra points, slide misses a game-winning field goal. They got away with, and then of course give a lot of credit to the defense, which again we haven't talked about. What was it 6 plays inside of the goal to goal where they held up against the Panthers, and then of course Breeze, 11 plays. 65 yards, 156 left on the clock. His 50th game-winning fourth quarter overtime touchdown drive, game-winning touchdown drive. That last 2 minutes of the game, well, the last 3 minutes or so of the game was really exciting for the fans, but also get a little bit of heart attack going on with a kicker that was having a bad day.
Yeah. Well, I would say this. I mean, the Saints had some of those games last year too.
Like Cleveland.
Like Cleveland was
Mm-hmm.
the first one that came to mind. That happens sometimes. I mean, these games. A lot of these games are ultra competitive. I guess the glass half full side would be that they're so good from top to bottom that they can't even beat themselves sometimes.
Yeah. Maybe so.
Or,
Yeah.
Whereas a mediocre team makes those kind of mistakes.
They don't overcome them.
They can't overcome them.
Yeah. Final word on the Saints. Saints Atlanta. Obviously, they weren't ready to play in the game in the Dome. Saints got a few injuries that are key. Lattimore, we don't know if he's going to be back. With again that Atlanta wide receiving core with Jones and Ridley. We obviously discussed the Armstead and Pete situation. What do you think about tonight's game?
It's going to be interesting to see if Julio Jones is even going to be able to go. Talked to a beat writer who writes for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he basically said he'd be surprised if Julio Jones is able to play on such a short week after being injured in the Tampa Bay game. Devontae Freeman, it's another big question mark. He was a huge part of that game, being able to run the ball. Atlanta ran the ball down our throats, got Drew, kept him on the sidelines, got him completely out of rhythm. So they're going to have to stop the run first. That defensive line's got to stop the run. If Jones is out, that kind of is a wash with Lattimore being out. But the defensive line's got to step up, control the running game, and if they do that, I think they'll be able to have some success. And I'd like to see the Saints, conversely, give Atlanta a dose of their own medicine. Come out with Latavius Murray, pound the ball like I said earlier, get the running game going. That opens up the play action for Drew. It's going to give him some more time. Short passes, too.
Your thoughts on tonight?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons Atlanta ran the ball well is because they were ahead the whole game. So the Saints, I mean, if Kamara didn't trip in that, when he was wide open for that screen pass touchdown, I mean, all these weird things happened that kind of, and the game wasn't really out of reach until the end. It was still a pretty close game for most of it. So I think that this is a natural bounce back game for the Saints, even though they've won 2 straight, just relative to the previous meeting.
Right. Did you see anything in the locker room that week? I mean, you were in the locker room all week long. Did you feel anything different, that they weren't ready, they were taking it light? I mean, we all talked about the engagement party on Friday night and everything else that went on. Coming off a bye week, Peyton doesn't lose anymore after coming off the bye week since him and Andy Reid had that conversation about how to treat this. Did you notice anything?
Not really. It may have been just this very subtle kind of relaxed
like we got
temperament. Yeah, you couldn't kind of blame them even if it was just subconscious, because they had, won a bunch of games in a row, and Atlanta just looked terrible.
No, they did.
And looked like they were in disarray.
But we all know, again, when you get into this NFC South, you almost got to throw the records out because, again, teams play up, and it's a situation where. Much like tonight, much like we saw against Carolina last week. I mean, the Tampa Bay thing, it is what it is. I thought they had a great game plan and really kept Jameis Winston at bay. It'll be interesting to see what happens. All right, we're going to come back. When we come back, we're going to talk about the controversial college football poll in which Ohio State passed LSU. We'll get into that. We'll talk about LSU Arkansas. We'll get into Tulane. We'll talk some Pelicans as well. Our guest on the panel tonight, Brett Martel, the Associated Press, Jay Hardgrave of ESPN 100.3 here in New Orleans. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Happy Thanksgiving.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. Happy Thanksgiving to all. Our guest tonight, Brett Martel, Associated Press, Jay Hardgrave of ESPN 100.3. College football rankings came out on Tuesday night. Ohio State passes LSU for number 1 in the land. The Tigers are second. Clemson is third. Georgia rounds out the top 4. Alabama and Utah are 5 and 6. Again, all season long we've been talking about the LSU schedule. And the toughest schedule in football. I've talked about all year long, again, about taking each one of these teams, these games in a vacuum. When the Tigers played Texas, they were a very good team. They were ninth in the nation. When you talk about when LSU played Auburn, when LSU played Florida, just because teams start to falter down the stretch of the season doesn't mean when you played them, where you played them meant anything. Obviously, to this committee, the eye test has been something they've been looking at all season long. Some will say Ohio State is the more complete team. LSU, to me, has the best resume. It looked like it was going to be setting up for this with Penn State and Ohio State playing last week, and then Michigan and Ohio State this week, with LSU having to take on last week, taking on the Arkansas Razorbacks, which are down, and Texas A&M, which is down as well. Gentlemen, I'll go to you, Brett, to you first. A lot of people here in Louisiana upset by this now with LSU being passed. Fair, unfair? Did the committee get it right?
It's a tough call, but you know, maybe some of them had money on LSU and they didn't cover.
Yeah, maybe so.
Because they gave up those 2 touchdowns at the end, which were total flukes. But anyway, Ohio State had a big win over Penn State. LSU played a team that has no wins in the conference. Texas, which is one of LSU's big early season wins, lost, so they're kind of fading.
Right, but when they played them,
when they played them,
they were a top 10 team.
They were a top 10
and healthy. And
right.
They got injured throughout the season. From the Oklahoma game on is where again that season fell apart for them. But go ahead, continue.
Well, I'm just saying that could have figured into their reasoning. But when you look at what's to come with the SEC championship game and so forth, I mean, you have to imagine that if LSU wins, convincingly on Saturday against A&M and beats Georgia, they'll be back at number 1 anyway, so it won't really matter. But unless Ohio State just absolutely annihilates Michigan and also has a lopsided Big Ten title win, which I guess would be against Minnesota.
Yeah, either Minnesota or Wisconsin, I'm guessing, right?
So
it'll be probably Minnesota.
I think it's going to be Minnesota.
It's going to be Minnesota.
Yeah.
Jay, what's your take on this?
I'm going to disagree with you. I think this is the Alabama factor. And I said this a while ago. I thought when LSU was number 1, they would stay there. Had Tua stayed healthy, I thought Alabama was going to get moved up into the 3 slot. That way they could avoid an LSU-Alabama matchup in the first round, and the rematch would happen in the national championship. You can't jump Alabama into the 3rd spot with Matt Jones as the quarterback. Right. So the only way to avoid an LSU-Alabama matchup is to drop LSU down to number 2. You can't argue that LSU doesn't have the better resume. It's not even up for debate. Auburn has 4 losses. So you can look at it and say, well, that win is not that great. Who are their losses to?
Right.
Alabama, LSU, Georgia, they may lose to Alabama again. So when you're playing in a conference that's this deep and you have to go through that kind of a juggernaut of a schedule, and then you throw in a loss to Clemson, that's not a bad resume. You can't say that's a negative on your resume because you beat a team with 4 or 5 losses. Ohio State has no resume. And if you look at the teams in the back, Utah, all of the teams looking in, that's why I think Alabama's in. Nobody has anything to hang their hat on. Oregon had the best game, and that was against Auburn, and they lost. That was the team with the best resume game. Everybody else, there's nothing there. So I think if Alabama does beat Auburn somehow Saturday in the Iron Bowl, I think they're in.
That's interesting because I think this committee is all over the place. I think for some teams they're looking at it and they're looking at the eye test. For some teams they're looking at it and they're looking at the resume. I don't know how you can look at LSU's resume. When they played these teams, they beat 5 top 10 teams. They beat 1 team was in the top 2. Okay, they beat 2 of those teams on their own home turf. But yet again, they are now penalized because Texas has faded because of injury. Auburn and Florida have faded a bit because of the tough SEC.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State did beat Wisconsin handily and obviously just beat Penn State. So they do have 2 good wins, but not as good as LSU's 4 wins, I guess. But maybe there's just maybe it's the way that Ohio State has looked in winning some of these games that affects people's judgment. The idea that they would drop them down to avoid an Alabama rematch is it sounds a little bit like a conspiracy, but I understand what you're saying there. Because they don't want. There may be even subconsciously they don't want to have to. Right. Deal with
and I would argue that Alabama's schedule, is not that good outside of the SEC. They played no one. Western Carolina last week. Come on, okay? And if anything, they should be penalized because they are not playing a tough schedule.
And that's what the NCAA has got to watch, because that's what's about to happen is why am I – look where Auburn is right now. Gus Malzahn, it's like I always say, it's not the holidays until Gus Malzahn's on the hot seat. Gus Malzahn's on the hot seat. We know Thanksgiving's here.
Right.
But why – and I don't know what their AD was thinking to schedule Clemson and Oregon and then go into the SEC schedule of LSU, Alabama, A&M, Georgia on top of that. But why would you go out and schedule tough games? Why wouldn't you do what Alabama does and schedule Western Carolina and Delaware A&M? Why wouldn't you schedule teams like that? Because then all I got to do is get through my conference. I'm undefeated. I'm going to the championship.
Yeah. And then you got that. You got the Alabama prestige as well, no doubt. Any final thoughts before we move on?
No, let's go. Let's move on.
Let's talk about Texas A&M. Obviously, LSU beats Arkansas 56-20. They're now 11-0. They've won the SEC West. All that could be talked about in the locker room after that game was Texas A&M and avenging the loss from a year ago. Was it 74-72, 7 overtime loss to Texas A&M? I'm sure you were there on Saturday night. Talk a bit about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because they backed off a little bit on Monday when I went back for the player and coach availability. And so I pressed Orgeron on it a little bit, and I said, "Look, I know that you want to say," because he was backing off and talking about how last year has nothing to do with this, just like losing 8 in a row to Alabama had nothing to do with this year.
Right. That was Monday, though, right?
Monday.
Yeah,
he said
on Saturday it was on, right?
Right. He said it's on. He said I'd never forget that game. That's what he said on Saturday night. And then, of course, Joe Burrow said everything with his eyes and not his mouth, right? He said, "I'm very excited for Saturday." Why? Chance to win 12 in a row, or a chance to go 12-0, I guess is what he said, with a big smirk on his face. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire just went ahead and said that the pain from that loss is as bad as it gets. So Orgeron comes back on Monday and says we can't. Last year has nothing to do with it. And I said, well, look, I know that I know what you're saying in terms of personnel. Being different and maybe some play calls being different, and certain players are going to have new assignments this year compared to last year, and they obviously have to focus on them and execute those. I said, but football isn't a physical game like football. Isn't it an emotional game? Doesn't emotion help sometimes? And he's like, certainly.
Of course.
And
can drive a team.
Yeah, and then he went on to say, look, we're going to be sky high because of what happened last year. We just can't get too high. But it's pretty apparent that. And it's smart, actually, on Orgeron's part, because when you look at what LSU has been through this year, if last year hadn't happened, they might not be that up for this game. And the last time I covered a game like this was in 2007 when they weren't up for Arkansas.
Right.
And I'll never forget that game. Right. Multiple overtime game, Darren McFadden going crazy, and they lost. And at that point, I thought I was writing an article about how LSU blew its national championship hopes.
Well, wasn't that the year where, again, I think Hawaii, that was BCS.
And
Boise in the last game of the night, and that put them over the top in terms of the points.
West Virginia and Pitt, it was some kind of combination there.
Pitt upset West Virginia.
Yes.
Yeah, West Virginia really blew it too on that game. So, it was a combination of factors that allowed them to squeeze in and then redeem themselves against Ohio State. So, that's why it probably helps to some extent for them to have this motivation and senior day.
I agree with you there. I do agree with you, because other than that, they might be flat, thinking about Georgia in the SEC championship and looking past them. Your thoughts? Again, look, I was surprised they came out talking about A&M right after the game ended. That shocked me.
Coach O's got a good poker face.
Yeah.
But think about this. He gets the hat trick if he wins this game. He gets Tom Herman and Jimbo Fisher, the two guys who LSU supposedly wanted badly over him to be the head coach, and he gets Ole Miss, the school that fired him. So this is the hat trick game for him. So he finishes it off if he gets Texas A&M. And the way they lost that game last year, it was a tough loss.
Yes, it was.
You know, you laid everything. You laid everything on the field. You got some bad calls that didn't go your way, but I think they bounced back. And I'm not impressed with Kellen Mond. I think he's taken a big step back. That offense at Texas A&M, I expected a lot more out of Jimbo Fisher with Kellen Mond, an experienced quarterback, and they just don't seem to have it. Defensively, they're okay, but I just don't see how they can match up with LSU.
They are SEC West champions. They are going into Atlanta to take on Georgia in a week or so. Can't finish LSU before we give a lot of props to that Tiger offense. Burrow, 4,000-yard quarterback. Chase and Jefferson, 1,000 yards receiving, and a guy that I underestimated, and a lot of people also underestimated, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 1,000-yard rushing. It's the first time in SEC history that's ever happened.
Right, and it's amazing. And Burrow also has 40 touchdown passes. So.
There you go, 40 touchdown passes.
I mean, it's been an unbelievable show for someone who's covered this offense since Jamarcus Russell was the quarterback, and I thought that looked pretty good. You know, I remember when he and Dwayne Bowe had set a school record for quarterback to receiver. You know, and you're talking about a 100-year-old program, and those two guys set that record, and then it stands until it gets absolutely obliterated this year. And it's nice to see. I mean, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it's cool because he was overshadowed by some of the recruits coming in, but he's the local kid who's been with the program for a while, and the only one who probably could have predicted this outside of Clyde himself was Darius Geis, who used to rave about him because they were in high school together. Right. You know,
I didn't see it coming. Did you? Honestly.
I mean, so everything he's done this year, I've seen signs that he could do it before, but he was never that consistent in previous seasons. But he, I think, crossed some sort of threshold mentally, you know what I mean? Just maturity-wise and mentally focused, where he's able to really harness it in the big moments, you know? I mean, his veteran leadership combined with Burrow's veteran leadership, and then just the talent of the young receivers has been extraordinary. You know, and the offensive line's been pretty good.
Yes.
So it's just been an absolute joy to cover, and I don't know when I'm going to get to cover another year like that for offense again, but hopefully next year the defense will be better.
Yeah, well, if recruiting goes as advertised, they will be better just based on what they're bringing in. I thought Clyde Edwards-Helaire was going to be a guy that could come in. You were going to protect Burrow in terms of his blocking. I didn't see this 1,000 yards, what he's been able to do in the passing game, the big time plays he's made. I always thought Chase and Jefferson had the opportunity to be 1,000-yard receivers. You kind of felt that Burrow, based on what you saw last year, was going to be good. I didn't think we'd be seeing a guy throwing 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns, though. Your thoughts on this record-breaking year?
Look, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think I have to get in front of you in that line, because I said at the beginning of the season I expect maybe week 3 or 4 that John Emery's going to take over as the starting running back. I thought that was a slam dunk. And shortly thereafter, I started seeing the pass protection out of Edwards-Helaire, and it just continued to grow and get better and better every week. And this morning I'm driving to work and I'm thinking to myself, okay, the Heisman, Burrow's going to get it. But we always thought it was going to be Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa and Trevor Lawrence going to get the invites to go to New York. I don't think any one of those 3 guys get an invite. Does Clyde Edwards-Helaire get an invite? He's got 1,400 all-purpose yards between passing and running. And how many games did he come out of the game at halftime because of a big lead? He's got 16 touchdowns. This kid might deserve an invite. He's not going to win the Heisman Trophy, but he might deserve an invite to New York, but just because of the 1 year he's had. And I think I'd love to see where they're going to project him into the draft.
I want to talk about the defense, and that's kind of been the Achilles heel for this team. That's one of the reasons why probably Ohio State passed LSU in the rankings this week. A lot of people used to, again, a championship-style defense for LSU. It starts up front. They don't have the defensive linemen. I think the linebackers are really good, and I think on the back end, if Delpit was healthy, they'd be much better. I like what they're doing in terms of the corners, but again, they're young back there. Losing Todd Harris hurt them, obviously, at the safety position early in the season. Critique this defense for me.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think, Divinity had some off-the-field issues that probably undermine them to a certain extent, both in terms of the pass rush and just the chemistry among the defensive front as a whole, probably.
Would you agree Chasson has not been the player as he's been advertised since coming to LSU?
Not on a weekly basis, but he has had some good games, and I thought he played pretty well at Alabama. Actually,
he did.
It's just I think
he led the Tigers in tackles that day.
Yeah, and he was very close other times. I mean, like the penalties that he would draw, on some of those games that were called back for Alabama because they were holding him, trying not to let him get to Tua. So they have talent on defense, and the linebackers have played well, and intermittently the DBs have played well. I mean, you can't ask for much more than Christian Fulton on one side, and the freshman Derek Stingley Jr. on the other side. But for whatever reason, I mean, they haven't always played as one. They've taken bad angles, missed tackles, and just had some very untimely busts. I mean, that's the thing, is when you look at them, is that you could watch an entire game and see them make all kinds of good plays throughout the game, but then have these uncharacteristic explosive plays against them. A lot of long passes and runs. And then you combine that with the offense giving them no time to rest and adjust and take coaching instruction on the sideline because of some, probably, 24 touchdown drives that were less than 3 minutes long this season. I think it's a combination of factors that made it very challenging for them on that side of the ball.
Critique the defense for me, if you would.
You hit the nail on the head with the defensive line. They just can't get the pressure that we're used to seeing from LSU. Coach Oto, he told us this last year after the Alabama game, and he took a lot of heat for it.
He did.
But he said we don't have the offensive and defensive lines. He was being honest, and he was right. They're getting there. I think Brady and Ensminger's offense has disguised a lot of those problems.
Deficiencies, yes.
But the only pressure LSU's able to get with the front four is when they're running twists and stunts. And Dave Aranda can only do that so many times. They're having to commit linebackers to trying to get pressure on the quarterback, which is leaving the secondary vulnerable. I think Delpit is missing John Battle a lot more than people want to say. It's taken him some time, and when Todd Harris goes down, now he's got to get used to Stevenson. And they're starting to get it down, and you're starting to see him play better, and then the injury happens. But I think Dave Aranda is in the first time in his career at LSU struggling with a defensive line that's not able to give him the results that he's used to getting out of his front four. You get pressure with the front four, and you got 7 to play in the coverage. Look at the 49ers. We talked about them earlier in the show. When you can get pressure with the front four, you win. Plain and simple.
Guys, let's shift to Tulane now. 6-5, 3-4, the AAC, and it's been the theme of the season. This is a team that has taken the next step, but this is also a team that has hurt itself. Self-inflicted wounds all season long, whether it is bust, whether again it's the penalties, which have been an Achilles heel for this team almost in every single game. They have not beaten a team, I believe, with a that's going to a bowl or a winning record within their conference. Just a few weeks ago, we were talking about them possibly challenging for the AAC West. And of course, that hasn't come to fruition. This, to me, is a huge game against SMU this week for a lot of reasons. Number one, again, where you're going to go in a bowl. Number two, to get that 7th win of the season. And also, again, to kind of maybe calm some of the naysayers out there who believe that, again, that Tulane is probably still a couple recruiting classes away from being a contender within the AAC. A lot of people felt they were there this year. In the back end of the season, when they've taken on more stiffer competition, they haven't really been able to win consistently.
Yeah, I mean, the negative Nancy's among Tulane's Tulane observers or fans, and there are plenty of them, are seeing the ammunition stockpile up here lately. But you could say, well, I mean, Memphis, they had no chance. I mean, they obviously got blown off the field in that game. That was a day where they didn't show up and the other team played great. Auburn, they weren't expected to win at Auburn, but they were competitive in the first half. They could be 9-2. I mean, they lost. They had a bad first quarter at Navy, then almost pulled it out, lost on the last second field goal. Navy just beat SMU. They had a game against Temple on the road, very much like the game they just had, which I was able to watch because it was way before the LSU game, where throughout the game they executed okay, but in all the crucial situations they not only didn't execute, they bungled it. So a classic example would be, for example, there was a 4th and long they were trying to defend this past week, and UCF. So it wasn't a question where like UCF got the first down by an inch, right? Mm-hmm. They threw the ball to the 1 yard line. It was like a 40-yard pass. Yes. You know, it was just a completely bungled play. You know, it wasn't. You'd have a 3rd and long for Tulane, and it wasn't a case where it was 3rd and 11 and they got 10 yards. And you know, it's just too bad. They were close. They would get a sack, and then it would be like 4th and 20 or something like that. You know, and so every time they were in a big play situation, they wouldn't just not execute. They would bungle it, and it tipped the balance of an otherwise close game that ended up 1 possession apart. But if they had been able to handle those situations better against Navy, Temple, and UCF, they'd be 9-2, and it would be a much different storyline. But so, you know, I mean, they always talk about the margin being thin, you know, between wins and losses a lot, and more so in the NFL than in college, of course. But they haven't crossed that thin line, if you will, and they still need maybe some more depth and maybe better composure at key positions, more maturity or whatever, mental acumen at key positions to cross it.
Your thoughts on the
I think it was a combination of a lot of things, Eric. I think they, you know, as you said, the self-inflicted wounds, they got to stop. You can't make penalties and mistakes against good quality football teams. You miss a field goal early in that game Saturday against UCF, how much you lost by 3. I get it, you can't add that in and say the game would have been tied. It changes the whole complexion of the game. But those are the types of mistakes you can't make against good teams. You had the injuries to Bradwell and Dauphine. Will Hall's offense is built around the running game, and when you lost your top 2 running backs right when you were getting to the meat of the schedule, and you know, as we've been talking about how deep the AAC is, I don't think any of us realized how deep it is. You look at a team like Houston. They brought in Dana Holgerson from West Virginia, and everybody's saying, oh, look out for Houston. They're one of the worst teams in the league because it's Central Florida, it's Cincinnati, it's UCF, it's Navy, it's Temple, SMU. You go from one game to the next, you can make the argument they're better than the Pac-12 right now, top to bottom in the conference.
7 teams have either been ranked or just outside the top 25 this season from the AAC.
It's brutal. I mean, you know, you finish with a team in UCF. I get it. They proclaimed themselves the national champions, but they were undefeated and, you know, had a couple of great years. You get rid of them, and now you're looking at SMU, another ranked team who likes to throw the ball all over the field. So there's no rest for the weary. And if you have a few injuries, you better have a deep staff. And I think they're, you know, a couple of years away. Willie Fritz is a good football coach. He's going to get the recruits in, and they're going to be able to cross that threshold. We were just hoping maybe it was going to happen a little bit sooner than later.
He was frustrated after that last game, though, because you could tell in his post-game interview that he was talking about telling the guys that they have to stop botching their assignments.
Can't just roll the ball out there and expect to win against good teams and have these self-inflicted wounds. And it's been the theme all season long. It really has, and that's the frustrating thing about it. I want to get to Pelicans, but I want to give a shout out to Southeastern and Nichols. Southeastern gets the at-large bid from the Southlands Conference. They are going to host Villanova on Saturday up at Strawberry Stadium. Nichols, of course, the station of Nichols Athletics, ESPN 100.3, gets the automatic bid. They will host North Dakota on Saturday in the FCS playoffs. So congratulations to both those teams and good luck to both of them. Let's talk some Pels. As we are taping this program, we do not know the situation, what's going on with the Los Angeles Lakers and the New Orleans Pelicans, so forgive us for that. We don't have a crystal ball. We'd like to, but we don't. So let's talk Pels. As of the taping of the show, they are 6-11. They are playing much better basketball, and that's the thing that I like about it. Inconsistent at times, playing much better defense. What I like is I think the team's fortunes changed once Drew Holiday went back to the point guard position, and now has been not just facilitating, but also looking for a shot. I see this team going to the boards more. A lot of that has to do with Jackson Hayes and also Kendrick Williams, who's always in the paint doing the dirty work for them. Also a team that, again, when they attack the rim, they are a much better team. When they stand around and just shoot 3-point shots to the detriment of this team, that's when I think they run into problems. This has kind of been a work in progress for Alvin Gentry up to this point. With the chemistry issue, looks like the chemistry's coming together, but there are 10 games between the Laker game and December the 15th when Zion is expected to come back. Then you have to restart this thing all over again because he's such a ball-dominant player. Up to this point, your thoughts on the Pelicans?
I think they've shown a lot of potential, and they've struggled in areas where you could reasonably expect them to struggle, such as chemistry, because it's not just an overhauled roster, it's a very young roster. Again, learning how to play defense in the NBA is so much more sophisticated than college, and it requires good chemistry because guys have to be able to have a feeling for what their teammate's going to do when they're trying to pick up certain defenders and rotate and all those things. So you would expect them to struggle in that area, and when they do struggle in that area, and when they struggle with turnovers, which is also a chemistry thing sometimes, you're going to have a hard time winning. But at the same time, they when they are playing well together, they look fantastic. I mean, their upside looks huge between Jackson Hayes blocking shots and reverse alley-oop dunks or whatever he's doing above the rim.
I don't know how you keep him off the court anymore now.
Yeah,
I think I thought he would be a guy that'd be a borderline G League at the end of the bench. I think he's put himself in a position now where he's got to play every night.
Well, he was one of the best centers available in the draft, I think, and he was drafted 8th overall. So,
because of his slight build, you thought you had to maybe give him a redshirt year this year.
Maybe, yeah. But he's really athletic, so he's doing a great job. And Alexander Walker is coming into his own.
Fearless.
Yeah, he's fearless, and when he's hot, he can really shoot from outside. He had a stretch where he had like 11 threes in 2 games.
Yeah.
So
turnovers have been their issue.
Yeah.
Okay, when they turn the ball over, they have real problems. But when they can clean that up, and they're not casual with the basketball, that's when they're much better.
I would say the injuries have been a little embarrassing for them, though, just because they bragged about how they had overhauled.
Yeah, Aaron Nelson bringing him in. Yeah,
and but it's still. I mean, it's only a month into the season. So if you look over the course of the season, if their games missed injury are way down, then they'll have backed it up. But so far, it hasn't gone that way.
You get the final word on the Pels.
I think you and Brett nailed it. It's the ball movement, and it's too many times that, as I call it, church league basketball, where we're just bringing the guy who brings the ball up, walks up to the three-point line, and jacks up a three.
Yep.
That guy needs to sit the bench, and Alvin Gentry's got to hold those guys accountable. If the ball's not moving, you can go to the bench. Not a problem. We got plenty of guys on the bench that want to play. When the ball moves, they're a good team, and and I think that's what's frustrating a lot of the fans. If we had this record and we sat there and said they're maximizing what they did last year at the end of the year when Drew Holiday was playing with guys from the G League, they maximized their effort. They were playing as hard as they could and as smart as they could. I haven't seen that this year because as of late the ball movement's been a little bit better. But I fully expected by this point we would be trying to come up with a nickname because the Clippers already use Lob City, and we couldn't use that nickname, but we're not even throwing lobs. And when you talked about Jackson Hayes, and you got a guy like Lonzo Ball who can throw lobs like that, I want to see 5 of those a game. When Zion comes back, I want to see 12 a game. And we're not seeing that. Attack the glass, that's how you get to the free throw line. Now teams can't run the fast break, and now you're not having the defensive numbers that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. To me, Lonzo Ball was one of the more exciting players out of that trade. Obviously, again, when you talk about Ingram, he's been the best player in that trade. I love what Hart does. But he is more trying to be more of a three-point shooter than a facilitator. And you're right. You should be able to, with him at point guard, you should be able to be playing above the rim, and they're not doing that consistently. If anything, he's coming in looking for his instead of being a facilitator.
It almost looks like he's trying to show off his shot. It's like, look, I've changed my shot.
I worked on my shot.
Let me show you what I got now.
Right. No, I agree with you. Thoughts on Ball? I got about 15 seconds.
Generally a disappointment so far, but he's been injured, and like you said, I mean, he needs to get a little more comfortable with his surroundings on the court and with his shot, and we'll see what happens. I mean, it's a long NBA season; they're a month in, but it's going to need to improve significantly by the time we get to the end of football season.
when this system is working well and they're moving the basketball and there's motion on the court, it's like a ballet. When it's not, it's really ugly to watch. And of course, defense is also a big part of that as well. Jay Hardgrave, ESPN 100.3, Brett Martel, the Associated Press. Happy Thanksgiving to both of you. Thank you for being on our program tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE-TV at 10 p.m. Also on Pelican Sports Television, 9 o'clock every Friday night. That is statewide. You can catch me on the radio, Sports 1280, 101.1 FM HD2, and the iHeartRadio app. That is noon to 2 weekdays. You can listen live, download the podcast at ericasher.com. All the previous episodes of this program can also be seen at ericasher.com as well. Special thanks to our underwriters for underwriting this show. Also to the WLAE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Naila Jones, Alex Chacon, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Eric Asher. We hope you and your family have a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend. We'll see you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.